Hi there everybody, this is Tracy. Today I have got a very exciting experiment for you to learn about. We're going to talk with a cannabis industry specialists and we're going to learn how you can possibly treat some of the symptoms of your PTSD. If you can't sleep, you have trouble eating, you're having anxiety, panic attacks, there are products within the cannabis world that can help you with all of those symptoms. And how I got introduced to cannabis is kind of an interesting story. Most of you have heard the story of me being arrested by my narcissist, and I then became on probation. And because I was on probation, I was about to go meet the probation officer the next day, and I was so nervous about that because I was shamed and fearful. And when that happened, the night before, I decided to smoke a bowl to relax. And when I walked into the probation office, they said, you're going to have this in your urine and you have to have a license, or we're going to have to put an ankle bracelet on you. So I had to go see a medical professional to get a license. You see a doctor that is an expert on these sort of symptoms, and they teach you about treating those symptoms with cannabis oils, CBD oils, things like that. Cannabis has been used as a medicine for over 4,000 years. If you look back at the history, it started in China, and Chinese medicine has been using cannabis to help people for a really long time. There are 2.6 million people using cannabis currently in the United States, and there are 20 states that are medically approved, and there are only 9 states that are approved for rec and medical. So if you visit a state or if you've got it, I want to help you learn what to do. So my special guests today are going to teach us that. Let's go cannabis shopping. Let's help you learn some stuff today. Come on in.
Definitely, that's what we're here for.
Come on over. So thank you guys. I want to welcome you to my show, and let's do a little introduction. Tell us who you are and what you do and how we're in this discussion today.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Jason. Been working for Starbuds for just over a year now, and I've lived in Colorado for about 5 years. I've been using cannabis self-medicating for about 13 years, since I was in 8th grade actually.
Okay.
And I've been using it to treat my ADHD, anxiety, depression, onset PTSD later on in life, and it's just been an amazing plant that's really changed my life for the better.
My name's JD. I've been living in Colorado now for about 4 years. I've been in the industry for about 2. I've been using cannabis for about 10 years. I definitely came to it a little bit later in life. It gave me the ability to have a bit of a different perspective. It's nice to be able to share that with a lot of my friends who kind of used cannabis, at a younger age. And fortunately for me, it's been, a very positive experience, and it's something that I continue to promote and try to educate and continue to, educate others and educate myself on as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I believe in wholeheartedly, and I truly believe I'm alive today and cancer-free because of the health benefits that cannabis has had. It's given me the ability to continue to heal myself and stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start talking about cannabis. What I want to do is help the victims and survivors that are on my channel understand what cannabis can do for some of their symptoms. victims will have PTSD, which means they're going to be re-experiencing trauma. They're going to have sleepless nights. They're going to have anxiety. So can we talk about the benefits of, let's start with different types of actual weed. So can we describe the different types and what kind of benefit, and then we'll get into the other products.
So there's indica and sativa, and so typically the sativa strains will give you that mental, physical stimulation. I want to get up and do stuff, more of your daytime smoking, and indicas are going to be more of your evening time, really sedative, lackadaisical weeds. And so depending on what you're trying to satiate or what you're trying to treat with with cannabis, you're going to want to go for a sativa strain or indica. So typically people with pain are going for indicas, and same with anxiety and that kind of thing. And then people that just have maybe acute pain or want to take the edge off throughout the day are going to be smoking sativas just to keep them going. Is there anything you want to add on to that there, Jay? Or?
I think one of the biggest things too is for people to continue to educate themselves and kind of bring their own personal story to the table. When it comes to the two umbrellas, as Jason was saying, of indica and sativas, one of the biggest things that people are worried about when they're coming back to this, having been out of it maybe for 2 or 3 decades, is that their friend had a poor experience, or they had a poor experience with maybe extreme paranoia and things like that. And so one of the very specific things to think about is that if sativas are a more of a brain active, stimulating, psychoactive experience, if you're prone to anxiety, or like specifically we're speaking, in the case of some of your followers and your viewers, with PTSD, things that can be exacerbated by anxiety, to maybe stay away from those types of strains. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that weed is weed and it doesn't really matter what you're smoking. And marijuana and cannabis is as diverse as the wildflowers you see out there, and so really understanding where you're at personally and what you're specifically looking for is a very important thing when you're coming back to this stage.
Yeah, I know that Jason told me a story. I would love for you to share with my audience about how you were introduced to cannabis and your story of how it's changed for you.
Certainly. This was back in, I hate to admit this, but like 8th grade. I first smoked my first joint in Tennessee with my older brother. But at the time, I had some friends that, said that they were going to smoke, and I was very anti, like, no, that's so bad. They're going to ruin your life, And, I personally have struggled with ADHD, depression, anxiety, PTSD from abuse that I personally gone through at home. And cannabis for me was kind of just one of those things that just replaced all my medications. I was on antidepressants, sleep aids, and Adderall, and just my ADHD medication.
And were you concerned about being a pothead and being spacey, like your grades, like that? How does that affect you?
At the time, it wasn't brought up to me in a medicinal way. It was more so I was hanging out with my brother, and he's like, "Bro, I got some weed. You're my little brother. Let's smoke some weed." So I was like, "Okay, sure, let's have some fun." And I ended up doing that, and it was just very eye-opening. It was almost for the first time I felt I could say normal, without having to take my medications. I was on 3 different meds, threw those all away. I started cheating my pills. My mom was still giving me my medication, and I would put them in my mouth, but I wouldn't swallow them. I'd spit them out as soon as I walked out my front door.
Wow.
And I'd smoke weed on the way to school, and my grades skyrocketed. My sleeping pattern stabilized. I started gaining weight. I was always underweight. There's all these different things that weed has helped for me personally. And it's just, I love being able to share that with other people now. My anecdotal experiences are very subjective. What helps me with certain things can totally be something totally different for other people. And it's all about experimenting and really just figuring out what works for you. But your endocannabinoid system is what dictates, there's a lot of different bodily functions. So that's, whether it's mental or physical, whether it's pain or emotion. And cannabis, with your own experimentation, your own therapeutic regimens, you can absolutely isolate the best treatment for yourself. At first my family was very skeptical, and my parents threatened to send me to rehab, and it was all kind of, looking back, it's all very laughable now that I'm working in the industry, and my paychecks have taxes taken off of them, for the cannabis I'm selling daily. And it's just it's very interesting in where this industry has gone and where it's taking me personally.
That's what I want to share with my audience, is how it does change people's lives, because if you don't live in a state that has cannabis, either recreational or medical, you just don't know. And I had some friends visit a week ago, and they just were like, we have trouble sleeping. What do we do? And that's what your job is to educate people. You keep up to date not only on the indica and sativa and the hybrids and the actual bud, as we call it, but you keep up to date on the extracts and the oils and the all kinds of stuff. So can you guys tell us about the other types of products that people can turn to, like the CBD, and what kind of products involve that, and what does CBD do?
I think in that vein, I think one of the biggest things that people are wondering is if they actually need to smoke cannabis in order to garner the health benefits, and that's not true at all. There are multiple ways to ingest cannabis and get its health benefits. A lot of people have heard of a hash oil, sublingual hash oil, and that's kind of one of the main ways that people are treating treating epilepsy in children and things like that. It's one of the best, most effective carriers and uptake for it, based off the research that they have now. So that's something to look into. There's lots of edible products, and those just make the cannabis oil easier to ingest. Everything that's made edible is really made out of a basis of cannabis oil. There are a few companies that have crystallized THC that makes it water soluble, which is pretty cool. So that kind of gives you a variety of options for uptake. But like I said before, is definitely continuing to educate yourself as much as possible. Every experience that you're going to find right now is anecdotal, as Jason has said. There are no legitimate clinical trials. And part of that has to do with the inability to get legal product and the federal laws. So continuing to not just believe what you're told, and really educating yourself from a multitude of different sources, looking at different countries that are pushing reform as well. There are quite a few other countries that are starting to legalize, but we kind of are on the forefront of production. I do believe Israel is at the forefront of research.
Yeah.
And they've been finding that treating symptoms is much more beneficial than thinking that they can cure diseases with it. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have. It's something that I believe actually as well. I don't truly believe cannabis is curing diseases. I think we have the ability as human beings to heal ourselves of almost all disease. It's whether or not we're healthy enough to do so. And so one of the things that people have issue with when they're dealing with cancer or PTSD and things like that is your sleep schedules are off, your eating is off, and not sleeping right is one of the biggest factors to having mental instability. At least that's been my personal experiences. I've had a bit of an opposite experience with Jason. I didn't come to cannabis until I was 21. So I really did not partake in any kind of substance. I don't want to say abuse, in recreational drug use until I was fairly, my brain was fairly developed, and I think it gave me a different perspective on things. I have a lot of friends now that smokes way more weed than I did when I was young, when we were younger, and now they don't use cannabis at all, and they're kind of adverse to it because they didn't use it properly. And that's kind of one of the, I think, main mitigating factors in how people perceive this plant, is whether or not their first experience or the anecdotal things that they've heard from other people are positive or negative. Mm-hmm. And taking all of that into account and realizing you're going to have your own personal experience is also kind of where we're at until a large-scale clinical trials are done and doctors will have the ability to stand behind real research. And I think that's one of the things that people don't understand, that the medical field is so adverse to talking positively about it or this and that. And it's because they're doctors. They base their opinions off legitimate clinical research, and if they don't have that, they almost kind of confused.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate too, because at least here in the States, I mean, cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug in like 40 other states within the U.S. So I mean, it's hard for people, especially folks that come to Colorado. They hear about the benefits of marijuana, whether it's to smoke, to apply to your body, to ingest, or to even vaporize. There's all these different sort of methods of application, and depending on what you're using to treat. Whether you are treating using a salve to treat your arthritis pain or using a CBD vape to treat your panic attacks. I mean, it's unfortunate that these people are able to experiment here in Colorado. They cannot bring it back to Arkansas, insert state here, and and they also don't feel comfortable talking to the doctor about it. Because I can say, even if I'm if I go back to my doctor, I don't want to tell my doctor, oh, hey, I smoked a whole bunch of weed on my vacation and it really helped with my pain. Yeah. What can I do? The doctor, are they going to call the police on me? Are they going to put this in my medical file? How is that going to negatively affect me? And so a lot of people are not really, I mean, they're being a little bit more secretive and cautious about it, and it's all due to the laws. I mean, if it was, open like you were saying, and doctors did have the ability to do these large-scale practices and stuff, and so you weren't relying on anecdotal evidence of, people have been smoking weed for a while, I think that we'd be able to really ascertain actual therapeutic benefits, or not actual, but, fully understand the therapeutic benefits of these applications of cannabis to each individual.
You guys are so smart on all of this, not only from your own personal experience, but you do research. You've got a book here that is the Cannabis Health Index, and he was showing it to me earlier, and this is going to go through every type of symptom, if you would. You've got this PTSD, I'm not sleeping. So what I think you should think about is when you do go, if you've got medical or recreation, a lot of people are nervous. It's almost shameful, especially at 57 years old. I'm going into a pot store. There's shame. There's shame involved.
There's still a very large stigma. I mean,
there's shame, there's nervousness, there's insecurity.
Well, and it's also what you're going to experience on the other side of the counter. I feel like, fortunately, in my workplace, in the dispensary that I work at, we really try to have a focus with our bud tenders that we're here for education. I mean, these products sell themselves. I always say this place could be filled with vending machines and people would still come in and, look on their phones and do some research and spend their money and go home. And, maybe what they're getting isn't exactly what they're, going to specifically need. And so we're really here for that educational experience. Rather than to just get you the best, joint to get you the highest. That's really, that's not the conversation that we're having. And so it's finding, if you do visit Colorado or any other place, or if you're at your home state, it's also don't be turned off by the first experience that you have. It may be that you need to find a dispensary that is, right for you. I do know that, one of the owners within our company, she's a 65-year-old lady moved from the East Coast, and her and her husband open, and she honestly is changing the face of what people think, cannabis sales are, and what this industry is, and I think that's a very positive thing. I think once more people realize that there's very large health benefits without the side effects. I think that's the biggest thing. There are lots of health benefits from all the over-the-counter drugs and all the big pharma that we have, but it's how necessary are they, to what levels, and are the side effects really worth the positive effects? And if those drugs are legal, then they are. I mean, there's drugs out there that, harden your liver and kill you and kill children, and we're still giving them these drugs because they have a larger success rate than a fail rate. And so why wouldn't you do research in something that has a very possibility of a very large success rate, and there's a failure rate as well, but it doesn't have such a negative side effect.
There's different ways of consuming cannabis. So you can apply cannabis topically, really awesome for, joint pain, muscle tension, that kind of thing, even anxiety relief. I got people that get tension headaches, and they'll put some topical salves along the back of their ears, along their temples, and that helps reduce that physical muscle tension, and that will actually decrease the stress in that way physically. You can vape, which is vaporizing, so you're vaporizing the oil. So the difference between smoking and vaporizing is there's combustion happening when you're smoking. So vaporizing, you're heating the substance to its boiling point and inhaling those vapors, just like you boil water on your stove. So when you're vaping, it's actually a lot better for your lungs. So if you are somebody who is conscious about your body, maybe you're an athlete, or maybe you're older and you don't want to, have that harshness in your lungs, you can turn to a vaporizer. And there are various forms of concentrates. We'll get into that here in a second. And then, of course, you have your regular flower, and then you have your edibles. And so when you are, depending on what you're trying to treat, everybody has their own therapeutic dosage and their own therapeutic applications. So like I mentioned before, salve, great for muscle pain and tension. Vaporizing is great for that instantaneous effect. So, if you get panic attacks, you can take a couple hits off a vape pen or take a few hits off some buds and instantaneously feel those benefits. Versus an edible, you're going to have to eat and allow that digestion process to happen, which could take up to an hour, depending on the person's metabolism. And then you get into other form of edibles where you can do a sublingual tincture, where the cannabis is actually absorbed through the lining in your mouth. Tends to affect you a little bit faster, also has a quicker decrease. But there's numerous ways to consume cannabis, and it's really up to the individual and their own body and where they're at as far as what their preferred method is. Me, for example, I prefer to smoke. Edibles for me, they don't really affect me all that much. I've been a daily user for about 12 to 13 years, and I've been, I'll take 4 or 5 gummies and I barely feel anything. So I'm still smoking throughout the whole time, you know what I mean? But that's just me. I got other people, I've got this gentleman, 45, 6'5", huge guy. He takes 5 milligrams and he is gone. So that's all about, figuring out your subjective, endocannabinoid system and seeing where you are deficient or resistant to. And that's all completely subjective and just takes some experimentation.
Can someone overdose on cannabis?
It's medically possible. The hilarious thing is you have to consume, I remember reading 400 pounds or 400 times your own body weight. So, is it actually possible? Yes. But is it easily achievable? Absolutely not. It is basically risk-free from overdose. There's literally no possible way.
When it comes to definitely flower ingestion and edible ingestion as well, you'd really, really have to eat quite a few edibles. The biggest thing that you have an issue with is just how, psychoactively high you get. But medically, you're not going to have an issue. When people, it was one of the things that why the industry became so regulated is that people were coming to Colorado and getting too high and ending up in the hospital. And the only thing that the hospital can really do for you is to put you in a bed and keep you calm and hydrate you. And that's it. There's really nothing else that's going to happen to you. Lately, there have been developments and people talking about, what is it, CSE? It's not CTE. CTE is the, when you get knocked around too much, too many concussions. But what it is there are cases of people becoming really hypersensitive to THC, and it's making them extremely nauseous, giving them a bit of a vertigo effect and things like that. And what they found is that if you just stop ingesting THC, it goes away. So I think that has to do with the advent of concentrates and the ability for people to ingest very, very high levels of THC in a short amount of time. But I also think that it has to do with concentrates possibly being produced improperly. And that can lead to a bit of, contamination effect. That's something that may be confusing to some people as I talk about that, but during the processing of certain concentrates, they are using volatile solvents that are removed out of it, just like any other pharmaceutical. There's things during the process that are not very healthy for us, but afterwards it's fine. But if it's not done properly, then it can be detrimental to your health. So I think that's where those cases are coming from, is improperly processed concentrates, maybe at home, things like that, because everything within our industry is so heavily regulated. It's almost frustrating, but at the same time, I think it's necessary to keep the level of protection for the consumer.
Absolutely, and having that, so the edibles, gummies, and chocolate bars, and cookies, and things like that, they're not just like the old-fashioned put an ounce of pot into the brownie mix and throw it in the oven and see what happens. These are specifically and usually very small cookie, and it's got usually 10 milligrams or a specific.
One of the things, so we don't lose a lot of footage, actually, the industry has changed that you actually cannot use the terminology gummy, cookie.
Edibles.
Edibles,
it's edible, or like even the cookies on the shelf are called bites. It's very specific.
Okay, that's good to
Weird.
know.
I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
and so that's one of the things that right before you started in the industry, they pushed through a law that changed the shape. Nothing can be made in the industry that is the same shape of anything that's existing outside in the world. So there used to be peach rings, no longer. Now it's just a solid puck. Most of the candy is like a funny square. We're not even technically supposed to be using candy as terminology as well. It's definitely interesting. I mean, there's laws put in place to really protect and I think it's fair. People that want nothing to do with this industry, that still have a certain, belief about what cannabis may do, they're allowed to have their opinion, and they're allowed to also be protected from that and feel safe in the environment as it develops. I think there's got to be space for all,
Oh, absolutely.
except for like hate and bigotry. I'm okay with not leaving any space for that.
I wanted
And abuse.
I wanted to backtrack a bit. When you asked me about overdose, I was thinking lethal overdose, but I wanted to just throw in there a bit about your therapeutic dosage levels, because you can overdose your therapeutic dosage level and not be lethal,
and be very uncomfortable.
But you could have inoptimal experiences with more dosage, or suboptimal with too little. So I want to touch on that a little bit eventually. But if for example, if you're asking about sleeping, some people I've taken, like I said before, I took a lot of edibles. I take about 3 or 4 whenever I'm trying to get to where I want to be. I did the same thing with a particular product that's supposed to be really good for sleeping, and I slept for 16 hours. I mean, I slept through my alarms, and that was of course an adverse effect, because I didn't want to sleep for 16 hours. I wanted to sleep my 7 to 8 hours and wake up normally and not miss my meeting with my attorney that morning. But that's an example of how a good thing, something that usually is really good, could be with proper dosage level, will actually get you your thing.
And that can happen with any pharmaceutical prescribed by your doctor.
Absolutely.
The advantage that pharmaceuticals have is that they have precise doses based off of clinical trial research. So they say. I mean, if you do any research into clinical trials and how they're how they're published and things like that, and how they're actually done, you find out that sometimes they can be very, very skewed to give the information that's desired.
Exactly.
And so I think having critical opinions within the industry is important to keep things, where they're supposed to be. It's very nice that everything is recreational, gives people a chance to try it themselves, but I really do hope in the future for a higher level of regulation when it comes to treating this as a medicine. I really hope I don't see it go the way of being alcohol, tobacco, in that sense, and warning labels, and at your own risk. I really truly hope it's something that can be used for medicinal use, and that's also something that people should educate themselves on as well. Is it's not just cannabis as a plant. There are different cannabinoids within the plant, and based off of what strain you're looking at and deciding to produce, you're going to have much different effects. The thing about the recreational industry is now it's garnered towards the highest levels of THC, the most intense psychoactive high, and things like that, and that's understandable. It's for that experience, but there's also the other side, the medicinal side, that has no psychoactive effect, and they're really looking for the cleanest produced product, the best uptake, you know what I mean? Not just kind of the flashy numbers game.
Yeah.
So it's weeding through that as well, as an outside consumer, and really understanding what you're getting yourself into and what you're looking for. And I think when you go into a dispensary, if you're very clear about what you're looking for, you should be able to get pushed in the right direction as well.
Or, see, they won't necessarily know what they're looking for, but they know what they want
Well,
to
in the sense of
alleviate.
symptom relief.
Exactly.
That's
the
actually
key for
specifically
people to
that's
know
what I
is-
mean. Yeah,
is
it's
like,
not
yeah.
specifically in what you're looking for, what cannabis you're looking for. It's the symptom relief that you're looking for, and believing and knowing that there is something out there for you. I think one of the biggest fears of the professional medical field is that the pro-cannabis crowd is so adamant about this working so amazingly, and it is, but the fear, I think, from the medical professionals is that you're basing a complete opinion off of what is still anecdotal evidence, and so they sound a little silly saying that, but it's also the truth, you know. So I think if people want to continue to see this make progress, it's changing legislation and increasing research and getting us to a point where you can go get cannabis to treat whatever you have going on with you, and not have to deal with adverse side effects. I think that's the biggest thing for me is there's all sorts of things that work out there, but it's whether or not you're dealing with consequences afterwards. And there are consequences to cannabis use as well. I feel like any overuse of anything on the psychoactive side, on the high levels of THC side, can possibly, the probability, like Jason says, to lead to problems as well. There is some research to say that very, very high levels of THC over very long periods of time, especially in young males, can have adverse effects. But I mean, that would just make sense to me. You spend enough time in a different brain state, your brain rewrites how it decides to deal with things, and then when you're not in that state, you don't deal with things the same way. But that's, like I said, that's the psychoactive side of the cannabis plant. The non-psychoactive side, and then all the other cannabinoids that we don't even have research into, is where I truly hope a lot of focus is put. I mean, it's definitely nice to get high, for sure, but it's using it for its positive effects, I think, is what's.
And with so less chance of things happening. I mean, if you look at any drug commercial on the television, 40 seconds of the 1 minute commercial are about the warnings, and you could die, and you could do this, and whatever it is, there aren't that type of side effects.
You might sleep.
You
sleep better, but you could die, and your heart's gonna bleed.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, so you could say the same thing with cannabis. You might eat more than you want, and you might sleep a little longer than you want, but you'll sleep. None of those things are dying. None of those things are having hallucinations and fighting your loved ones. I mean, there's some, quitting smoking aids that, I've had friends with personal experiences that completely changed their mental state for an adverse effect, So it's like, that's terrifying,
And the great thing about cannabis is, like I mentioned before, it's all about, the consumer having a choice to being able to put. And it's not just, I describe to my doctor just nods, oh yeah, okay, you need this, and this dosage, that's it. And then I get a 2 month supply of this medicine, I just do it and see what happens, And I mean, that's a little intimidating for some people, and other people, I mean, they've been their only experience with any issues that they've ever had. There's never been this self-medication, the self-experimentation, even the cognitive experimentation. I mean, one of the things I've been doing research into as well is combining cannabis with philosophical practices to pull yourself out of these negative mental places. I mentioned before, struggle with anxiety and depression my entire life, and with cannabis and actually changed my outlook in various aspects of my life has really just given me deeper sense of healing outside of just what the cannabis did to me on a chemical level. You know, it's just
Being more mindful about things that you can be doing, meditation,
nutrition, yoga,
breathing,
exercising. All of these things are so integral to, you know, your wellness as a person. It's just, it really has to all be considered as a whole. And, you know, I feel like at least, you know, with Western medication, it's always been, nope, this pill is the solution. That's all you have to do. Don't have to change your lifestyle at all. Just take this pill and your cholesterol levels will go down. That is, in my opinion, the wrong way to go about things, because there's billions of people on this planet and your body is not the same as mine, and you know, what works for you might not work for mine.
And if you take that pill for cholesterol and then you eat a gigantic hamburger, that's what the false thing is, that people, like you were saying, you know, your actual actions are going to make a difference. Because if you're just laying around and doing nothing and you're on a drug or you're on cannabis, you know, get up and do stuff and really make a difference, because there's so many things we can do. And this has been so wonderful to you guys. I want you guys to think about, when you are going to a cannabis store, even if it's for your first time, think of these guys as the pharmacist in a way. They're going to know what will help your symptom. So don't be afraid to ask the bud tenders. And if you don't get a good reaction from the bud tender that is in a place where you live, then search out something else. You've got to experiment, as they've said, to understand where your threshold is. And so thank you guys so much for educating all of my people, and what you're doing is wonderful. And I want to thank you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, our pleasure. You know, I mean, we really, you know, we here at Starbuds, you know, like all of our dispensary locations throughout, you know, Denver and Boulder area, you know, we all have done our best to really consume as much knowledge as we can, and we bring our own experiments and knowledge into, you know, any dispensary or any interaction that we have. So please just ask questions, do any sort of education for yourself, even just know general terms, indica, sativa, what different cannabinoids are. You know what I mean? There's plenty of resources online. Project CBD is actually a really fantastic resource. ProjectCBD.org, really fantastic website, particularly with CBDs and cannabinoid science. But I mean, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, and the more educated your questions are, the better we can actually help you.
Yeah.
So
that's what we want. So thank you guys.